Welcome, ladles and jelly spoons, to another 20th anniversary retrospective review, broadcasting live from the Orbital Broadcast Bunker, Britain's first and only airborne subterranean studio. Today we're diving into the cosmic horror of Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth.
Now, at my end, I can fully see my last case opening me a new fear, a real fear. A fear of myself.
20 years on and this game is still more unstable than any of my marriages, which is saying something. Tee up, lads! Although I must say, after reading about this particular game, I think I'm going to stick to me Earl Grey, rather than whatever eldritch brew Jack Walters is drinking. Did you know that the game Berserk is the first known video game to be officially linked to a real-life death? In 1981, an 18-year-old named Jeff Daly died of a heart attack shortly after scoring 16,000 points. The following year, another player suffered the same fate. Some say the game is cursed, but perhaps the real horror lies in the idea that pixels and code could trigger such a fatal reaction. Well, that were cheerful. Still probably safer than Friday night down Dog and Duck. Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth was developed by Headfirst Productions and published by Bethesda in 2005 for the Xbox, followed by a PC release in 2006. It's a survival horror game that combines action-adventure elements with first-person shooting and stealth mechanics. Now, I don't know much about these electronic entertainments. I do know that H.P. Lovecraft wrote some properly disturbing stories, rather like the time I discovered a badger had taken up residence in my garden shed. Fascinating creatures. Did you know that in the UK, badgers are actually protected by law? It is illegal to interfere with a set without a licence, even if it's inactive. About as relevant as a chocolate teapot, Keith, but cheers for that. The game follows Jack Walters, a mentally unstable private detective investigating a missing persons case in the mysterious town of Innsmouth. It's loosely based on Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth novella. Right, before we go any further, here's your spoiler warning. If you haven't played Call of Cthulhu, Dark Corners of the Earth, and you're planning to, well, first off, good luck getting it to run properly, but secondly, we're going to be discussing major plot points, so, you've been warned. Although, let's be honest, if you're watching a 20th anniversary review of a game that you haven't played yet, your priorities might need examining, like my drinking habits, according to the missus.
Itchy.
The development of Dark Corners of the Earth was about as cursed as the game's subject matter. Started in 1999 and spent 6 years in development hell. 6 years? On a 6-year bender once, I wrote a book on it. Fear and Loathing in Luton. Picture this. It's 1999 and some bright sparks at Headfirst Productions are chatting on internet forums with Lovecraft fans, collecting ideas for what they're calling an FPHAS, a first-person horror adventure shooter, because nothing says, we know what we're doing, quite like inventing your own genre abbreviations, does it? 6 years. 6 bloody years this thing was in development. It started when Tony Blair was still pretending to be left-wing and finished when he was bombing the Middle East. That's not development hell, that's development purgatory, with a mortgage. Originally planned for 2001, the game was apparently 70% complete before E3 of that year, which in developer speak roughly translates to, we've got a bloke called Jack and he walks around a bit. Then the delays started. Publishers' musical chairs began. Ravensburger Interactive got swallowed by Joe Wood, who took one look at this Cthulhu project and said, yeah, cheers, but no thanks. Eventually, Bethesda picked up the pieces. Probably out of pity. The really tragic bit was that Headfirst had these grand plans: 4-player co-op, non-linear RPG elements, competitive multiplayer deathmatches, because obviously what Lovecraftian cosmic horror really needs was the ability to teabag your mates after a good tentacle stabbing. Budget cuts and reality checks killed off most of these dreams faster than a shoggoth in a phone booth. They even had to bin loads of weapons, wooden clubs, shotguns, the works. 6 years of development and they ended up cutting more content than a BBC sitcom from the Thatcher era. Still, at least they gave us, well, yeah, we'll get to what they actually gave us. Originally planned for the PC and PlayStation 2, the game went through multiple publishers. Fish Tank Interactive went under, Joe Wood took over but weren't really interested, and finally Bethesda picked it up, but only for the Xbox and PC. The PlayStation 2 version got entirely scrapped. Reminds me of a proper brewing cycle, really. You can't rush a good brew. Speaking of interesting facts about tea, though, did you know that tea was once sold in compressed bricks in parts of Asia, and it was used as currency? Traders would snap off chunks to pay for goods. Quite ingenious, really. Unlike this game's development, which are about as ingenious as a screen door in a submarine. The ambitious features kept getting cut due to budget constraints. They originally planned a deeper sanity system, more environmental interactions, and a wider array of weapons. What we got was, we'll get to that. So, after all that mucking about, thing finally crawled out in October of 2005 for the Xbox, and the PC followed 5 months later, like a reluctant dog being dragged to vets. Now here's the thing, if you bought the PC version and you weren't English or Russian, you were proper stuffed in voice acting. Everyone else got subtitles, and that were a lot, like ordering a full English breakfast and getting told, you can have beans, but you have to imagine the bacon. Of course, even if you did get the full experience, it came with more bugs than a caravan site toilet block. Never got officially patched either. Bethesda basically said, there you go, best of luck, and wandered off to count them money. You'd be playing along nicely, and then all of a sudden you'd get stuck on a ladder, or the whole thing would crash harder than England's World Cup hopes. Your best bet was to save every 5 minutes and pray to whatever gods were listening. Mind you, this is a Cthulhu game, so it might not actually be the wisest approach. There's unofficial patches knocking about that sort out a few things and make it, less likely to kill you every 10 minutes. It's a bit like having a mate who knows where all the potholes are on the way home from pub. It's not perfect, but it's better than now. Now, it works on the 360 as well, if you're that way inclined, which is more than I can say for my marriage from 2005.
It won't open.
The gameplay in Dark Corners of the Earth is genuinely unique, although not always in a good way. You start off completely unarmed, relying on stealth and escape mechanics. No HUD, no crosshair, and your health is indicated by Jack's breathing and heartbeat, and visual cues like limping to imply broken bones. Yeah, nothing says immersive horror like not being able to tell if you're dying until you're already dead. A bit like watching Love Island. Oh, I rather like the sound of that. No unnecessary clutter on your screen. Rather like a proper brew. No need for fancy additions when the fundamentals are done right. Well, now, this is rather fascinating in its own peculiar way. You see, when you start playing this electronic adventure, you haven't got so much as a butter knife to defend yourself with. Rather like being invited to tea at the vicar's and discovering he's actually a vampire. You're not quite prepared for what's coming. Yeah, the clever bit is how they tell you about your character's well-being. No little numbers or bars cluttering up your screen. Oh, God, no. Instead, you listen to the poor fellow's breathing and his heartbeat, rather like your doctor checking your pulse after you've had a particularly strong cup of Earl Grey. Yeah, if he's limping about, making pained noises, well, you can deduce that he's broken his leg, can't you? Yeah, it's quite sensible, really. Now, there's a rather interesting business about one's mental state deteriorating when witnessing disturbing things. Screen goes all wobbly and you start hearing things that aren't there. That reminds me of the time I accidentally used caffeinated tea bags. Oh, absolutely dreadful experience. They affected my perception of reality for hours. Now, what I find particularly thoughtful is the realistic approach to firearms. No magical crosshairs floating in the air. You actually have to look down the little metal sights, just like my grandfather showed me with his old hunting rifle. And if you get tired from aiming too long, your accuracy suffers. Rather like trying to pour a proper brew when your hands are shaking. Precision requires a steady disposition. The whole thing follows one straight path from beginning to end, which I rather appreciate. Sometimes the simplest route is the most elegant, like a well-planned tea service, for instance. The sanity system causes visual distortions, screens pulsing and panic attacks. It's genuinely unsettling when it works, but it can also make the game literally unplayable if the effects get stuck, which they often do. Panic attacks and visual distortions? Sounds like open mic night at the Dog and Duck. In the early 2000s, the US military developed America's Army. a tactical shooter that masqueraded as entertainment, but was in actual fact a recruitment tool. Free to play, heavily promoted in schools, it tracked players' data to identify potential recruits. The line between entertainment and propaganda became terrifyingly thin. Good heavens! Go stick to me crossword puzzles.
There's no power.
So the plot follows Jack Walters as he investigates a missing person in the town of Innsmouth, only to uncover a conspiracy involving fish people, ancient gods and time-travelling aliens called the Great Race of Yith. Fish people in time travel, about as bonkers as Hideo Kojima on a creative bender. Well, these fish people don't monologue for 20 minutes.
Back in 1915, Boston police detective Jack Walters gets called to a standoff at some creepy manor. Inside, he finds a bunch of cultists who've topped themselves in a weird portal machine. 2 alien creatures pop out, Jack faints, and when he wakes up, he's completely barmy. Different personality and everything. After a stint in Arkham Asylum, he spends 6 years wandering about studying weird occult stuff, then suddenly snaps back to normal with no memory of what happened. Fast forward to 1922. Jack's now a private detective trying to piece together his missing years when he takes a case in Innsmouth, looking for some bloke named Brian Burnham, who vanished while trying to open a grocery shop. Big mistake. Innsmouth turns out to be full of murderous locals who immediately try to kill him. Jack spends most of his time sneaking through sewers and dodging homicidal fish people. He eventually finds Burnham and his girlfriend, but they get killed during the escape. The FBI, led by J. Edgar Hoover himself, picks up Jack and basically says, "Help us raid this place or else." Things escalate quickly. There's a military assault on the town. Jack fights a massive tentacle monster called a Shoggoth and discovers the whole place is run by a fish-worshipping cult. The story goes properly mental when Jack ends up on a Coast Guard ship fighting sea monsters with deck guns, then gets dragged underwater to an ancient fish city. He has to battle more creatures, including the god Dagon and something called Mother Hydra, before the Navy torpedoes the whole place. Here's where it gets really weird. Turns out Jack's been mind-swapped with time-traveling aliens called the Yith since 1915. His father was actually one of these creatures, making Jack half alien with psychic powers. That's why everyone's been so interested in him and why he's so good at solving cases. He's been having prophetic dreams. When Jack finally remembers everything, he realizes he spent 6 years living in an alien body on another world while an alien lived in his. Unable to cope with this revelation, he tries to hang himself back in Arkham Asylum. So basically, fish people, time travel, and cosmic horror that drives you mad. Classic Lovecraft, really.
Jack discovers that he's been manipulated by cosmic forces, leading to revelations about his own identity and connection to these otherworldly beings. The story's actually quite faithful to Lovecraft's themes of cosmic insignificance and humanity's fragile grasp on reality. Yeah, it sounds like the time that I tried to understand modern TV programming, equally bewildering and somewhat frightening.
Jack, is that you?
Mac.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this good rummage into gaming's eldritch past, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more retro reviews. We've got plenty more cursed games to examine from the bunker.
Where do they keep the keys to the cells?
I don't know for sure. Probably
The
somewhere.
voice acting features some solid performances, particularly Craig Seshler as Jack Walters. The cast also include Marcus Begali, Lani Minella and John St. John. John St. John? The Duke Nukem bloke? God, he's gone from hail to the king to hail Dagon. Career trajectory about as predictable as mine. Well, I do appreciate good voice work. Proper dictation's important, whether you're ordering tea or summoning ancient horrors. Jack Walters, our tortured protagonist, is voiced by Milton Lawrence, a proper veteran who cut his teeth doing radio work in Texas before moving to LA. The bloke's got serious range, does celebrity impressions, accents, the lot. Perfect choice for a character who's literally had his mind swapped with an alien. J. Edgar Hoover gets the treatment from Raymond Drummond, who you'll recognise as the original voice of Sonic the Hedgehog from 1998 to 2004. Going from a speedy blue hedgehog to the head of the FBI? That's what you call career diversity. Lucas Mackey, the undercover FBI agent, is brought to life by John Nutten. There's not much to say about John, except that he's got the perfect "I'm secretly working for the government" voice down. Marcus Biaggi pulls double duty as both Brian Burnham, the missing grocery clerk, and Victor Holt, the cult leader who starts this whole mess. Marcus is another Sonic veteran, which makes you wonder if there wasn't some sort of hedgehog casting director involved. Ruth Billingham, Brian's doomed girlfriend, is voiced by Lani Minella, a San Diego native who's been in the voice business for decades. She's got a knack for creating alien languages, which is rather fitting given the subject matter. And finally, John St. John, yes, Duke Nukem himself, voices half the town of Innsmouth, including Charles Gilman, various sergeants, constables and FBI agents, from Hail to the King to Hail Dagon. John is also known for Big the Cat from Sonic games. Yeah, so there's definitely a theme here. The cast bring genuine personality to what could have been a very dry Lovecraftian affair. When the voice acting works, it really helps sell the cosmic dread. The music and the sound design create an appropriately eerie atmosphere. The ambient sounds of Innsmouth, creaking wood, distant waves, unsettling whispers, really set the cosmic dread. When the audio works, it's genuinely unsettling. When it works being the operative phrase there, like most things about this game, really. Critically, Dark Corners of the Earth received generally favourable reviews, with scores around 77 and 80 on Metacritic. Critics praised the atmosphere and faithfulness to Lovecraft, as well as the unique gameplay mechanics. A bit like praising a racehorse for having nice eyes and ignoring the fact it's only got 3 legs and a drinking problem. Shut up. The major criticism was the game's instability. Bugs were endemic. Players got stuck in ladders, events wouldn't trigger, and the game would crash regularly. One reviewer said they had to restart the game twice due to game-breaking bugs. Good gracious, that sounds more unreliable than the 1979 British Leyland production line. Although I suppose that's saying something. Our commercial performance were dire in the UK. It sold about 5,000 copies on Xbox by the end of 2005. I've seen local pub quizzes with better attendance. And the game was praised by publications like PC Gamer and the Daily Telegraph in retrospective pieces. They called it a flawed classic that was too buggy, too tough and criminally ignored upon its release. So how did this cosmic horror masterpiece perform commercially? Well, in the UK it sold just over 5,000 copies on Xbox by the end of 2005. To put that into perspective, that's fewer people than attend a League 2 football match on a rainy Tuesday. Eurogamer called it one of the most disappointing commercial performances of the year, released to zero fanfare during a busy period. Brilliant timing there, lads. But here's the thing, critics absolutely loved it, even whilst admitting it was a broken mess. GameSpy ranked it the 10th best at E3 2004, and GameSpot gave it their most surprisingly good game award, basically saying, blimey, after 6 years of development hell, we're really shocked that this turned out decent. The reviews read like a love letter through gritted teeth. IGN said it succeeded brilliantly in some areas, whilst making players cringe at the difficult nature. GameSpot praised its thick, unsettling atmosphere that made up for the frustrating moments and dated graphics. Classic, backhanded compliments all round. Years later, retrospective pieces have been kinder. The Daily Telegraph called it a flawed classic that was too buggy, too tough and criminally ignored. PC Gamer ranked it 87th on their best PC games list, calling it a genuinely admirable attempt buried under bugs and clunkiness. GamePro even put it as the 11th best horror game of all time. So there you have it, a critical darling that nobody bought, loved by those brave enough to wrestle with its technical demons, the epitome of cult classic status, really.
It won't open. I don't like this one bit.
Headfirst, we're not content with just making one broken masterpiece. Oh no, they have grand plans for a whole franchise. 2 more games are supposed to follow, both announced back in 2002, when they were still pretending that the first game would come out in 2004. My words, they were making more of these electronic adventures? God, how ambitious of them. That's rather like planning a 3-course dinner when you've only just worked out how to boil water. Of course, Ed First weren't content with just making one broken masterpiece. Oh no, they had grand plans for all franchise. 2 more games were supposed to follow, both announced back in 2002, when they were still pretending that the first one would come out in 2004. First up were Destiny's End, originally called Tainted Legacy, until someone realised that sounded like a budget aftershave. This were meant to be set 80 years after the original, back in the ruins of Innsmouth, with co-op play. 2 characters, the bloke with guns and a lass who did magic. Proper forward thinking that. They even showed it off at E3 2005, promising a spring 2006 release. Optimistic doesn't even begin to cover it really. Then there were Beyond the Mountains of Madness, which sound like a hiking holiday gone wrong. Set in 1930s with Nazis hunting for ancient alien cities in Antarctica, because Nat says commercial success quite like combining cosmic horror with historical politics. Both games got chopped in 2006 when Ed First went belly up. Couldn't find a publisher to take another punt on their particular brand of ambitious chaos. I can't say I blame them really. Years later, various websites include these on their greatest cancelled games list. A bit like mourning the loss of a football team that never actually played a match. We'll never know if they would have been brilliant or just as broken as their predecessor. Both games got the boot in 2006 when Ed First went belly up. Couldn't find a publisher willing to take a punt on their particular brand of ambitious chaos. Can't really say I blame them. Yeah, such a shame when ambitious projects come to naught. Rather like when I tried to cultivate prize-winning roses, but ended up with a garden that looked like a Badger battlefield. Sometimes the vision exceeds the execution. Years later, various websites included these on their greatest cancelled games list. Bit like mourning the loss of a football team that never actually played a match. You'll never know if they would have been brilliant or just as broken as their predecessor. Perhaps it's better that way. Sometimes the idea of something wonderful is more satisfying than the reality. Like imagining a perfect cup of tea versus actually having to make it, with hard water and inferior leaves.
A few assorted documents and letters lie on the desk, but nothing of any significance. There's nothing important on the desk.
For those wondering about length, Dark Corners of the Earth takes roughly 8 to 12 hours to complete, depending on how often you have to restart due to bugs. And how often do you need to step away from a calming pint? Speaking of which... I say, that's perfect timing for a proper tea service. You could have several lovely pots on the go throughout the experience. Steam discussions suggest most players finish around the 10-hour mark, although that's assuming the game actually lets you finish. The final chapters are particularly notorious for game-breaking bugs. So, there you have it. Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth. 20 years on, it remains a fascinating artifact of ambitious game design, hampered by technical limitations and troubled development. It's like watching a brilliant footballer with 2 left feet and able to score his own goals. You can see the potential, but the execution is more painful than a relegation battle. Oh yes, a bit like trying to make a proper tea with instant granules. The intent is admirable, but the results are, questionable. For Lovecraft fans, it's still worth experiencing, preferably with the unofficial patches and possibly some divine intervention. The atmosphere and faithfulness to the source material shine through the technical mess. Right, if you do play it, keep multiple saves, more backups than a Premier League goalkeeper. Perhaps keep some nice tea handy for when the cosmic horrors all become too overwhelming. A good cup of Earl Grey can soothe even the most troubled soul. Well, that's all from the Orbital Broadcast Bunker this week. I'm Kai. I'm Pat. And I'm Keith, reminding you that some things are better left in the dark corners of the earth, like my gardening skills. If you've enjoyed our journey into this particular corner of gaming's Cthulhu mythos, make sure you summon that like button and seance this video with fellow horror enthusiasts, and subscribe for more retro reviews from Britain's only airborne subterranean studio. And remember, there are stranger things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your own mind, mostly involving game-breaking bugs. Until next time, keep your tea hot and your sanity intact. This tea is cold, and I'm wearing a badger on my head.